Hey guys, so today for this video I'm going to be trying something a little bit different from my usual content, and I'm going to be showing off one of my kill concepts for Dead by Daylight. Now I've been doing these for a while, but I've recently gotten back into them, obviously with the resurgence of Dead by Daylight's popularity, if you want to call it that. So yeah, let's just get on to it. The first killer I'm going to be showcasing in this video is my idea for a Macbeth chapter. Now, if you haven't read or heard of Macbeth, it was a play by Shakespeare, and it essentially follows Macbeth, a Scottish soldier who becomes overtaken by ambition after being told of a prophecy that he would become the King of Scotland, leading him down a bit of a rabbit hole into murders and other nefarious deals, which admittedly ends him up as the king, but also the disruption of the natural order and therefore the collapse of the kingdom and his demise. Only now he's taken by the entity. Now, the design brief for me for Macbeth was to both encapsulate his oppression and sort of systemic control of the kingdom of Scotland and the greater kingdom in the story, but also the four key motifs in Macbeth: blood, hands, sleep, and darkness versus light, the contrast between the two. And I did this by giving him a multifaceted power, not dissimilar from Vecna or Dracula, who are two of my favourite killers, if it wasn't very obvious. So with that out of the way, let's get on to the more specifics of the new killer, the Despot, aka Macbeth. He's a 4.6 meter killer, like most killers, and has the standard 32 meter terror radius. The Despot's main ability is called Sister's Prophecy, which is based on how the prophecy of Macbeth ascending to a king came from the three weird sisters who are witches at the start of the play. The ability itself is actually the Bloody Crown, which Macbeth wears, which allows him to open a power wheel, not too dissimilar from Vecna's power wheel, only with some slight differences, typically in how they're selected and or used. The first part of Macbeth's power is the Grave Hands, which obviously represents the hands motif. It allows the player to select a generator similar to Houndmaster or Freddy's way of selecting one of the generators, and allows them to essentially call a radius around the generator, about a meter, not huge, but around the area, to summon hands, which will injure any survivors who are caught in it. There is a very loud audio cue of an unsheathing blade and other such visual cues, but it's obviously meant as more of a zoning tool to keep survivors off a certain generator if they're pushing one specifically hard. The second part of the Despot's ability is Bloody Conviction, which is based on the blood motif. This ability essentially allows, it's very similar to Oni. When the Despot injures a survivor, they bleed, obviously, but if they hang around a certain object, like a generator, for a certain amount of time, it will form a cesspool on the generator. This will then cause a percentage debuff to repair speeds on that generator, and also will highlight the generator to Macbeth to indicate where the survivor or what generators the survivors are working on. It also, and this happens for all cesspools, so cesspools can form out in the open and act as a sort of a long-range tracking ability. The third aspect of the Despot's power is Sleep No More. Now, compared to the other two abilities we've already gone over, this ability is more passive. When survivors are not performing conspicuous actions or progressing the game in any meaningful way, they'll slowly develop a sleep meter, which, similar to Freddy, will decay over time. When the sleep meter is fully decayed, they will fall asleep, which will turn the world sort of grayscale like Dredge's Nightfall. This will also intermittently reveal the aura of the survivor to the killer every few seconds, which can be removed even if a survivor just taps a generator and then gets off it. So it's not the hardest thing to counter, but it's also good passive aura reading for the killer. The final key part of the Despot's power is Shroud of Darkness. Now, this power also works pretty passively, but does have an active aspect to it. When survivors do not interact with a certain object for a period of time, say there's a pallet in the corner of the map that no one's touched all game, it will develop dark webs. Now, dark webs can be removed by survivors through an action or through an item, which we'll get into a bit later. But this will essentially create a decrease on it, so it takes a certain, like a fraction of a second, a bit longer to just drop the pallet, which obviously messes with how the stun works and everything, but that's not the only part of the power. The more active part of this ability is the Despot's ability to teleport between Shrouds of Darkness. Now, I've got my friend here as the knight to demonstrate how it sort of looks, but you get the general idea that survivors need to be at least around different things in the game to prevent the killer from getting new powers, and I think this is the best way I've sort of introduced Macbeth's tyranny and constant presence. You never know when Macbeth's going to be down the corridor or just behind that pallet that you dropped. Now I think we're on to what I'd consider the most unique part of Macbeth's power, and that comes in the form of the prophetic foils. The prophetic foils are items that the survivors can find on pedestals around the map. They spawn randomly every few seconds, and each survivor is able to carry one at a time, sort of like Sadako's tapes, so it overrides the current held item but doesn't force you to drop it. They take the form of the lit candle holder, the banquet chalice, and the royal prayer book. Each of them represents the sort of three turning points in Macbeth's fears. He's afraid of the inevitability, with the out brief candle quote, which is quite famous in Macbeth. You have his hallucinations, which started at the banquet when he was hallucinating his best friend's ghost after he had him murdered at a banquet. And then finally the royal prayer book, which taps into Macbeth's fears of being unable to say amen after murdering Duncan. Each of the prophetic foils has their own use and ability against Macbeth. So firstly, the lit candle holder acts as a sort of AoE anti-Macbeth field. So the lit candle holder can be used to remove cesspools, it can be used to remove Shrouds of Darkness, it can be used to stave off the decay of the sleep meter, and it will alert the survivor if their generator is being targeted by the grave hands. Then you have the banquet chalice, which can be drank from by the survivor, which can be done while running as well, which is something important to note. When you do this, the killer will begin to hallucinate, and the survivor will temporarily turn invisible. And then finally, you have the royal prayer book, which can only be used while standing still, and it only has one charge, like the chalice. They both have one charge compared to the candle, which has a few charges, but the chalice and prayer book only have one. Using the prayer book will cause Macbeth to lose access to all of his abilities for a good few seconds, which gives the survivors a lot of time to sort of get their act together if they're really suffering. Alongside this power, I've also created a full catalogue of add-ons, which I'm just going to be flashing up on screen now because I don't have the patience to read them all out. But yeah, they're all sort of relevant or have relevancy. If you've read or seen Macbeth, you should get some of the references, which I hope at least somebody does. So it wasn't all for nothing, I suppose. I'm also going to be flashing up his 3 unique perks on the screen. But overall, I think that's it. That is my concept for the Macbeth chapter for Dead by Daylight. It's a bit of an out there concept, admittedly, but it is technically in the public domain as far as I'm aware, considering Shakespeare was dead about 400 years ago. But no, it's something that came to me just randomly and I decided to flesh it out, and I hope you all enjoyed it. let me know what you think. I'm very open for feedback, and I will see you all again with my next concept, or whatever happens with Dead by Daylight. Until then, see ya.